Hello and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today. For our free wire tutorial today, we're going to be making a 9-pointed star pendant utilising a focal bead. I've got one here with some rose quartz as well. These are sometimes known as nonograms, you know, like a pentagram but with 9 points. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look. So here is our 9-pointed star or nonagram pendant. I'm working with a specific ratio for today's pendant. That's what it looks like on the rear, which is still quite attractive, I think, but that's definitely my preferred aspect because you can see the face of your focal bead. So in order to get these ratios correct, I'm working with a single puffy coin or a flat bead, and this is 18mm in diameter. I'm going to be using 9 8mm faceted beads. Now they need to be round or roundish beads, they don't have to be faceted, but that's the perfect ratio, is 18mm in the centre and 9 of those 8mm beads. I'm also going to be using some 2mm crimp tubes to help me achieve that lovely spacing and the caging of that central focal. So the first thing that we're going to do is introduce our first wire, which is 1mm or 18 gauge, and we're going to be working with around about 12 inches of this wire. I'm working with a medium temper copper. You could work with a slightly softer wire if you wanted to, but ideally a medium temper, or just run that through a wire hardener, wire straightener tool to get a little bit of extra rigidity if you only have soft wire. Now onto this I'm going to be threading in turn an 8mm bead followed by a 2mm crimp tube. Now if you only have the round crimps, they will also work as long as they fit on your 1mm or 18 gauge wire. And then I shall thread on the rest of the beads, so in total there'll be 9 beads and 8 crimp tubes between them. So I've already added that on because we all know that watching me add beads onto things is really dull. So I've just slipped all of those into position, and I've just turned a little coil or a little curl on the end of the wire there just to stop everything from going all the way onto the floor like it normally does. So we're going to start down at one end, and I'm just going to warm that through and then allow all of those beads to move down and around. Now I'm going to leave around about 1.5 inches at one end whilst I manually just allow that wire to circle round. We don't want to put too much pressure on the beads. We just want that wire to do the work for you. Now we're looking for a circular form. If you're working, for instance, with an agate, as I am, you could use a round form to help you get that shape if you wanted to. A nice wooden mandrel, for instance. If you're working with more fragile beads, then just be very, very mindful. So we have that 1.5 inches on one end, and on the other end we're going to turn an upright after a teeny tiny space. So let's just push that wire away so that that comes up at the 12 o'clock position. Doesn't matter if the beads move around a little bit, to be perfectly honest. So what we want to do is to have that wire coming away at 90 degrees to the centre of your circular form. So I'm just going to give that a quick straighten up so it's easier to ascertain if that's travelling through the imaginary centre. And then what we're going to do is to ensure that those beads and crimp tubes are all neatly pushed against each other until we get that perfect circular form. Just hold that in position and make sure that your central focal will fit in the middle. If you're using a cabochon, for instance, you just need to make sure that that fits nicely. It can have a bit of space around it, but ideally it doesn't want to be sitting too much on top of those beads, or you'll get a slightly off-centre design. Let's just pop that back into the dish for the moment. So I'm just going to warm through that shorter tail for a second, and I'm going to grip on the very, very end of that section of beads and just pull that up slightly so that I can get it to cross over up at the top. Now we will want a little gap in between those two top beads, so I'm just going to pinch those two top beads very, very firmly in my non-dominant hand whilst I draw that shorter tail of wire around the upright. So I'm going to go for 2.5 wraps and see how that looks. There's a little bit of airspace there. That's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter if things move around slightly. But what we do want to have happen is for that to be a nice, neat coil up at the top there. So again, I'm working with agate, which is a very, very firm gemstone material to work with. Of course, you can work with whatever beads you fancy. So just trying to keep the distance between those two beads up at the 12 o'clock position as similar as I possibly can to the gap that exists between them elsewhere on that circular form. So I'm just going to draw that across the back now. That looks pretty decent to me, so let's just trim that away and then snuggle the wire down flat onto that core. So you can use whichever your favourite flat facing pliers are. I'm going to go for my bent chain nose pliers. Just get that to sit down nice and smoothly. And make sure that it is good and tidy. Let's have a look at the front and see if we're happy. Overall, I'm quite pleased with how that's looking. Now what we can do up at the top here, you can add a bead later on. We've got loads and loads of space to play with right now. You don't have to have a bead on the neckline if you don't want to. I think it looks quite attractive, but we're going to deal with that later. For the meantime, I have quite a lot of wire up here available. So I'm just going to trim a little bit off the end. And then I'm just going to rotate a wire around so that this doesn't ping everything off the rest of the desk. So again, just check that your central focal fits inside that shape before we move on to the next step. In addition to the design that we're making together today with the black agate centerpiece and those 8mm black agate beads around the outside, I made earlier on this rose quartz variation. Now because the beads here are 9mm, I didn't need to use those little spacers in between, so I don't have on this particular design any of those 2mm crimp tubes. So that exists as an alternative, but those are just over 9mm each, which meant that they were large enough when stranded onto the wire to allow that central 18mm bead to sit in position. So that's just an alternative. At the end of the tutorial today, I'll pop a photograph of the design side by side and you can decide, according to what you have in your stash, which one you'd like to make. I have now a section of 24 inches in length of 0.8mm or 20 gauge wire. I'm also going to be adding in my 18mm flat puffy faceted bead. Now this doesn't use the drill hole, so you can use a cabochon if you prefer. That's not a problem at all. It will hold it as long as your bead isn't so small that it will escape through that gap. As long as your cabochon isn't so small, it's absolutely fine. So I'm going to allow about 2 to 2.5 inches on the end of my lighter wire, and I'm just going to wrap that around the core. If I allow that to sit over the top of that nexus point where we tied the short end to the neckline, I'm just going to wrap that a couple of times around over the top of the wrapping we did earlier. So I've gone for 3 wraps, and I can take that over to the rear side and tidy that up later, or I can add a spiral if I desire. Right now I'm just going to ignore that and I'll do something with it later maybe. So we just need to smooth that wire through before we get going. One thing to be mindful of is that you don't pull your round form out of shape as you're doing any of your wrapping today. Because we're working with 18 gauge or 1mm wire, because it commonly fits through these 8mm beads, it can be a little bit floopy and squishy. It's quite easy to pull this round form out of shape, so we're going to do our best not to do that. So in order to stop the bead from falling out, the first thing we're going to do is ignore it. Draw that wire across the face of your design and push it down between bead number 3 on the right and bead number 4, and then we're going to draw that across the back, and it is going to come up 1 bead to the left of that neckline. So you've made a funny little V shape. Now your bead is quite likely to want to escape at this point, but what we're going to do is to slide that into position and just press with our fingers to hold it tightly whilst we bring the wire across to the left hand side of that neckline and then we're going to rotate around. Now this is very similar to my cyclic designs, which I've shown you here on my own YouTube channel for almost 5 years, and prior to that on the TV shopping channel for 4 years. I love working with cyclic designs like this. It reminds me of string art, which we used to play with at primary school. So we've taken the wire across the back of the design, and it's coming up between the number 8 and number 9 beads. I'm going to pull that across the face, again, not so tightly that I'm shaping out this round form. We want this to stay nice and round. Then I'm going to bring that wire across the surface between bead number 2 and bead number 3, and then push that down behind. Let's just take that across the back. So the tail of wire has gone across the back. The bead is still kind of floopy, wants to escape a little bit, don't worry about it. And it's going to come up between bead number 7 and bead number 8. So let's bring that across the surface of the design now, pinching over between 7 and 8, and then it's coming in a straight line to between 1 and 2. So push that across the back. Your bead is still quite likely to fall out at this stage, don't worry about it. So all we're doing is moving around with straight lines. So we're now going to take the wire across the back and pull that up between number 6 and number 7, over the top of that little crimp tube, pulling that into position. And we're going to take that now up between bead number 9 and bead number 1. Bring that across the back of the design, and you can see where we got to. So the last pass from the rear side to the front was just here. So we're going to move round anti-clockwise and come up between bead number 5 and bead number 6, all the way up to the top now. And that's got to now go between bead number 8 and bead number 9, all the way across the back again. And as you move through it, it becomes quite a mindful and beautiful undertaking. It's a bit like weaving. This, for me, I think is almost like a genetic memory. It's really strange. It just feels natural in my hands. So across the back of the design, we're coming up now between bead number 4 and bead number 5. Hitting the camera, obviously. And then over. We're always going back 3 beads. So across the back now, coming up one place further around, so between bead number 3 and bead number 4, back 3 beads, so subtract 3, and you just keep moving around until you have completed that process, and you'll know when you're done because you get back to where you started from. So let's have a look. Do we need any more straight lines? We do not. There should be a straight line taking every 3 beads that are possible. And once you've got all of those done, you know that you have completed your mission. So what we're going to do here is decide what to do with this sticky up piece of wire that we had a moment ago. At the moment, I'm just holding that across the back, that last piece. This is the rear of the design, so I'm going to trim away that piece now, making sure that you only cut the bit you wanted to. Now this is an 0.8 over the top of a 1mm. So what I might do with this one is just draw this up tidily across the back and take that to the naked piece of that neckline wire and just rotate around here. And I'll give that 3 turns, I think, because if I try to stack another 0.8 20 gauge on top of another 0.8 20 gauge, it all gets a bit chunky and it can kind of fall off. So let's make sure that that little section is nice and neat and tidy before we trim this one away. Now sometimes my brain doesn't manage to remember how to do these, and it's like a little voyage of discovery all over again, which is wonderful. It's like learning a new thing, but again. So those are both fairly completed. Now all that remains is for us to decide whether or not we want to add another bead up at the top. So in my example, I've added spirals and coils galore. You can keep it really clean and simple if you want to, but I will show you just now that we can add another bead up at the top and do something a little bit different. So with this example, it's just coils. I'll show you something different now. So I have a spare one of those 8mm faceted round black agates, and I'm just going to slide that onto the core wire up at the top here. What I wanted to do was just balance out the difference between the overlaid coil here and the single coil here. So what we're going to do is to add a very simplistic bail. Pop those pliers across your wire, draw it forwards. Let's create number 4, I think, on the bail makers today. Just to create a loop, just bringing that over to the side so we don't hit the camera again. Grip your round form firmly, give that a bit of a strengthen. And then we're going to fill in up at the top, just here. It will come in and out of focus as I move it towards the camera. And then when that returns to the front face of the design, get that nice and neat and tidy. What we're going to do is just encircle this bead a little bit. So I'm going to draw this from the front to the rear, like so, and I'm going to bring that all the way around twice, filling in that gap. If that gets away from you slightly, you can tighten it up, and then I'm going to bring that wire back. That's Joey saying hello. From the rear of the neckline of the design to the front, so we're adding a little bit of an open halo, taking that all the way around up at the top. And we've even got enough to add a spiral if you wanted to, but I think today, just to do something a little bit different, I'll take that wire around the rear of that bail and just trim it away, getting that pushed away neatly into the design. So just making sure that that end bit doesn't stick up. Give it a squeeze and tuck it away. So there's something just a little bit different to think about adding to your designs. I'll photograph all of those together with the rose quartz one in just a second. I hope that you've enjoyed making that 9-pointed star pendant with me today, or nonagram if you prefer. Sounds like jewellery you'd make for your grandmother. Have yourself a beautiful day. If you like the content, please don't forget to like, subscribe and share the videos. And I look forward to seeing you back here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel very soon. Bye for now.